Linda Boyer. I'm an associate professor of finance at the University of Toledo. That's my day job. My off-hours job is I work with the Northwest Ohio Patriot Coalition, which is part of the group that put this on today. And I also am the assistant treasurer for our newly formed Political Action Committee, which is the Northwest Ohio Conservative Coalition, which Jeff Leidy will be speaking about at the keynote sessions at the end of the breakout today. So I work with those organizations and I'm very proud to be involved in all of this. What we're here to do today is talk a little bit about the economy and give you some ideas of where we think things are heading and sort of some of the background to issues relative to the federal government's deficits and what impacts that has and how you can prepare for that. What I was asked to do when we were talking about putting this session together was I was asked to bring in some folks who I said had some real world experience as opposed to an academic experience, working with people and their money and taking a look at the economy on a regular basis. And the two best people I could think of were Doug Miller, next to me from Private Wealth Consultants, and Gary Rathbun, who is president of Private Wealth Consultants, who many of you have probably heard on the radio at WSPD every day. It's on occasionally Doug Subscorn on After the Bell and Brian Wilson. And what we decided when we met and said, what did we want to talk about? Probably the most common question I get asked by people is what's going to happen if the government keeps spending money the way it is, going into debt the way it is, what's going to happen down the road. And I'm fortunately old enough, a little bit older than my friend Doug here, to remember very clearly when we had high inflation in the Carter, beginning of the Reagan years. I was getting out of school about that time. I was a brand new assistant professor in 1981. I remember Treasury bill rates being at 14%. Again, I say that to some of my current students and they look at me like, no, that never happened. Yeah, it did. We had huge swings in interest rates, huge price increases. I was thinking about it, Gary, after our other talk about, if you remember, President Carter coined the phrase the misery index, and it was the inflation rate plus the unemployment rate. And I believe he said if it was greater than 10%, whoever was president shouldn't be reelected. And he wasn't. Am I right? I remember that because I believe when he was up for re-election in 1980, it was 20%, I believe, unemployment and inflation summed together. So I wanted to start out by talking a little bit more like an academic than these gentlemen are going to. Talk a little bit about what does inflation mean. Obviously, one of the things I think feel very strongly about is all of you need to look at, with a bit of a jaundiced eye at numbers that come out of the government or the Bureau of Labor Statistics or any of these organizations that produce data. Not that they are doing necessarily producing fraudulent numbers or numbers that they don't think are accurate. But the story I like to tell is when I was in graduate school in economics in the late 70s, we used to, all of us who were in graduate school, all did our research where we manipulated data to study something. And we used to all own a book, and I was going to look on Amazon or something and see if they still print a copy of it. And the book was called How to Lie with Statistics. And the purpose of the book was to say, you can take any set of data, and as we like to say in academics, torture the data until it confesses. You can make, by saying, well, we're going to, and these are some buzzwords that you do here, we're going to seasonally adjust the data. We're going to toss out some outliers in the data. We're going to do certain, in other words, they take a data set, and it's not just a pure data set. I think the best example that we saw recently was on the climate change, global warming stuff, where the guy said, well, you know, there was some data, those data were really important, so we just took those out. Well, of course that changes the outcome, all right? Every good statistician knows that, and knows that you can pretty much generate numbers and make them say whatever you want them to say. And that's, of course, we're all seeing that now in this political season with polling data. It's how the question gets asked, who do you ask, you get whatever result you want to say. So inflation, you have to be a little cautious about that. There are a number of different ways we measure inflation. The most common one is the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. When that comes out, everybody goes, ooh, the inflation number is down, the inflation number is up. And then the next month they revise the number from the previous month. So again, you're like, well, wait a minute, if that one was wrong, how do I know the one you're just announcing today is right? Well, you don't. There is a lot of maneuvering that goes on where they go back and correct what they've done. The CPI basically focuses on a cost of living index. It takes what is an artificial market basket of goods and says, how much has this artificial market basket gone up or down in value? Now, I went last night and looked up what is actually in the market basket. So let me go through this. I know it's a little numbery, but it's interesting. 14% of the basket is food and beverages. 42% is housing. 4% is apparel. 17% is transportation. That means energy purchases, gas, drive your car. By the way, the housing includes your utility. 7% medical care, 6% recreation, 6% education and communication, and 3% other. I think that totals 3%. Now, if you are, for example, retired, your home is paid for, your housing costs are probably not 42% of your market basket. If you're a younger person, just starting out, just bought your first home, your housing may be more than 42% of your market basket. If you're putting new windows in your house and new doors and just getting started. The point here is that sometimes they will say, wow, inflation's not that bad if you take out food and energy. Wow, last time I checked, those are the two things I pretty much always buy, is food and energy. So again, you have to be cautious about how they are manipulating the numbers to make them say what to some degree, what they want. So the other thing I learned in graduate school, and I learned this, got beaten into my head in economics when I studied Milton Friedman and monetary theory, was a statement that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. In other words, you get inflation not because of an Iranian oil crisis or an oil spill in the Gulf or a bad drought in the Farm Belt and commodity prices go up. Prices eventually get to whatever equilibrium they're going to get to. The only kind of way you get inflation, a general increase in the price level, is when there is too much money chasing too few goods. In other words, there's being money pumped into the system, and there's no place for it to go but to raise prices. Okay? So that brings us to the Federal Reserve. I had a couple of my former students here today, and they were laughing about, they came to the last presentation we did, and they were laughing at me about, they said, yeah, I remember you giving this talk in class. I always, in class, hold up a dollar bill, and I tell my students, I said, for every financial asset, there's a financial liability. So if this is my dollar bill and it's my financial asset, whose financial liability is it? And the students will usually say the U.S. Treasury, the federal government, something, mint, okay, whatever. The reality is that